Hi, today I'd like to look at some different ways of sending an email to find the best send time to optimize because that little thing, the send time can add some revenue to your bottom line without doing anything else. So just to make the most out of your existing assets, make the most out of your campaigns, you want to optimize the send time. And you want to make sure that you're sending at a time that's going to get the most eyeballs, the most attention, but also catch people at a time where they can make a purchase. So we have a bunch of little different settings that have some nuances and some things that are misunderstood. So I just wanted to make this quick video to create a sort of breakdown of pros and cons of each of these sending times and settings. I'm going to go over the first three pretty quickly because they're pretty basic, and then the next couple of ones are going to have some more advanced components that we're just going to talk about. And feel free to leave any comments or questions in the comments. And with that being said, let's dive in and hit send. So I have already done that. We are here on the sending menu at the very end. This is the very last step before we send a campaign. So first option is to send it immediately, right? It's not very exciting. It's mainly for if you're kind of late and you just want to get it out as soon as possible. That's when you hit send now. There's no control over the time, local time, what time it goes out. It's just going out immediately. So that's kind of an emergency one. That's why I start with this. This is kind of the most basic way you can set a campaign. And there's not much to say about it because it doesn't give us a lot of insight on send times, right? I just want to mention it because that's the obvious one. The one, so then, I almost never use this. We usually obviously work in this environment. So then we have the schedule and campaign option. When we want to schedule the campaign, we have two options. We have two options for the fixed send time. So that's going to be, the next two are going to be the fixed send time. You can either pick a time zone, or pick a time, a day and a time in a specific time zone. So if your audience is all in one time zone, you might want to pick that. And if you have if you have a reason to just want to send it all at one time, then you can pick that. And it has the advantage that it's going to go out at one time. So you know that it's going out all at the same time. But that's kind of the only advantage. And to be honest, it's not a big one because there's not a lot of advantages to knowing that. So what I typically use a lot more is recipient's local time zone. So this is going to send in the recipient's time. So if someone's in California and you set it to 12:30 p.m., they're going to get it at 12:30 p.m. California time, but someone in New York will get it at 12:30 p.m. New York time, provided you hit send at the right time, obviously, right? If you hit send at 12 p.m. California time for an email that's supposed to go out at 12:30 p.m., then you're going to have to just specify if it goes out immediately, which is going to be 2:30, 3:30, New York time, and or if you want to send it the next day at the specified time. So you have that option. That's a pretty nice one. I usually hit send immediately, but because a lot of times you're going to have this appears a lot if you're scheduling it within 24 hours, and I think it's just because whenever any time zone has crossed that threshold, it's going to ask you that. And so sometimes, if you're not focused on other international markets, sometimes this won't matter to you. So you just want to hit send immediately so you can get the data quickly, because otherwise it's going to be stuck in sending for more time. So, I have the fixed time here and then local time. I split them as two different ones. The advantages is they're very easy to use. The big advantage of the local time over the fixed time is that you send at your preferred time for every time zone. So a lot of times you'll decide which time zone you want to test or which send time you want to test based on what you think your consumer behavior is. And so logically it makes more sense, right? If you think that people are just getting off of work at 5 and you want to send the email at 5, it doesn't make sense that it goes to California recipients at 2 p.m. just because you're living in New York or on the East Coast, right? So that is kind of the advantages that you're not you're treating all people the same way, and so the data should reflect people's behavior the same way. Otherwise, we have a little bit of a time zone bias, and this is actually the only way that you can do local time. All the other more advanced ones don't have that. So this is a very big one, right? If you want to send at a specific time, that's the way to go. So this is one of the ones I use the most. This is my first recommendation for times. Again, immediate is only for emergencies. Fixed time, not very useful because you can just click on local time and have a much more reliable way of sending emails to people and getting accurate, measurable, comparable data. So that's the second option. It takes a little bit longer to collect data. I just put that. Honestly, I don't think that's a really big con because either way, you want to wait a little bit of time. I usually wait around 24 hours to look at campaigns. If I'm kind of really wanting to look at a campaign as soon as possible, I'll still wait a day because that's just how long it takes for the majority of the sales to come in. And then even within the next 2 days after that, you'll still get some sales coming in. So I wouldn't be too much in a rush to analyze a campaign. I would give it a little bit of time to populate either way, no matter if the results appear immediately or not. So I don't think this is a real con, but some people are more in a rush and want to see the results immediately. So if you are in that bucket, then this could be a problem. But again, I don't think this is something that needs to be a big deal. Next up is the smart send time. So that's when we start going into much more data-driven models, and it gets really interesting there. And so we have some more advanced pros and cons as well. So smart send time, basically you create this test, right? And it starts with an exploratory send, and it basically will send, as it says here, it will spread the email over 24 hours. It'll send to a chunk of your recipients every hour of the day for 24 hours. So over time, and you'll have to repeat this test a couple of times, and after, depending on how big your list is, it's going to take more or less time, right? And after a couple of times, it'll tell you the ideal send times. And then it'll be a time frame of 3 hours, and once you have that, it's going to give you another option here that's going to be within, select your ideal time frame, and then it's only going to send within that time frame. So it's a very automated, data-driven model, and that's a really cool feature of Klaviyo. That being said, I don't use it a lot for a number of reasons. So I'm just gonna show you this. Obviously, this is the most scientific method you could think of because it really tests every option. So there's no doubt, there's no question. It's purely data-driven. The problem with that is it takes an enormous amount of data to complete. And I'm going to tell you in a second, if you're not sure why you should care how much data it takes. Data is time, right? So if you want to run this test, like if you want to test 2 different send times and you set up an A/B test, which is going to be the next one, it might take you a little bit of time. It will take you a little bit of time to get the right time zone because it's going to take enough data. You're going to need enough data to accumulate to get a statistically significant result, right? So it's not going to be enough to just send one campaign. You might have to send, let's say there's a very clear difference in the times you're testing. Let's say you're testing 2 p.m. versus 2 a.m. Should be a big difference. That might not take too much time to complete because the results are going to be pretty obvious. So yeah, so that is, that's a good example. And then if you're testing 24 different time frames, then your data is split in 24, so it's going to take that much more time to get to a result that's really significant. So it's going to take a while to get there, and I think Klaviyo is rushing that process a little bit with accounting for tiny differences as statistically significant. I'm not completely sure if it's that accurate, but that's just my feeling. If we want to stay within the facts of what's possible and what's not possible with this, there are lots of waste. So this model really, you're going to send a bunch of email in the middle of the night, right? And this is why I stopped using this, is because it just became apparent that a lot of emails would go out in the middle of the night, and so that really kind of brings down your performance, and you're going to have to keep doing that until Klaviyo tells you that they found a good time, which is not going to be in the middle of the night. Worst case is going to, not worst case, but like at most it's going to be 9 to 11 p.m., which is where some users are actually active. But it's not going to be 2 to 4 a.m. It's never going to be that. So why do we need to test that? Um, and I'm sure there's some audiences where it makes sense, maybe if you're targeting night nurses at work or something like that. But this is a very specific use case, and I think if you're in that use case, and you don't need to, and if you're not in that use case, you also know that it's not going to work. So this is the kind of thing where some guessing is kind of the only way we can really get a lot of testing done, because if we want to be 100% scientific, we're going to waste a lot of time, and that means wasting some money, because we're going to take more time to find what drives more revenue. It's going to take us more time to get to the conclusions, because we want to be 100% certain every time. And so that's not, business wise, that's not an optimal choice. So this, I think, is a very cool looking feature, but honestly, I don't think that it has as much, I think it's not as useful of a tool as it's made out to be. But it is an interesting experiment. So if you're curious about this, feel free to try it. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend using this too much. Instead, the next two are going to be two that I'm much more interested in using and that I'm using a lot. So first of all, A/B tests. For A/B tests, we have to go into a slightly different dashboard, but it's a very similar way of it's if you're used to building A/B tests in your campaigns, for example, testing subject lines, it's the same place. So I'm just going to show you now. So we're here in our campaign, and we're going to just hit create A/B test, right? Okay, so in this case, for example, we're this is how we set it up. Sorry. So you don't use test content here. You keep the content of both emails exactly the same. So you don't do anything once you've hit create A/B test. You just hit test send time, and then you're going to be able to choose two different send times. So and this is because this time's already passed. But if we were doing 1 p.m. versus, let's say, 7 p.m., just kind of a noon send time versus a evening send time, this would be possible, right? And now we're testing two different send times against each other in a scientific way, right? This is still a very good way of using data and thinking scientifically. The only thing is you need to think about which data you want to test, right? You can't just say we want to find out the best send time. You have to say, I think these two different send times are likely to be different, and one of them is probably going to be better. For example, a lot of times what happens is we want to test morning versus evening, right? So then we pick one time in the morning, one time in the evening, 8 a.m. versus 7 p.m., and we just test them. And it's going to take a little bit of time, right? So it's also going to actually, it's going to need more work to compile that data. I just added an additional field here. You will need an additional spreadsheet, because if you want to test this over several campaigns, Klaviyo doesn't combine that data. So you have to manually consolidate that data, and that is more work. It's not the end of the world, but it's definitely more work. And so, if you want to get statistically significant results, it might take you a while to get there. And that's just from experience. These campaigns, a lot of times the send times aren't that different. It's more of an optimization. So again, if you're just starting out, or if you're not if you don't have a lot of time, because even if you're advanced, you might not have a ton of time to allocate to email marketing. If that's the case, you might want to stay in the simpler options, just because, and that's mainly local time. And that's just because sending emails at all is going to be much more important than finding the right send time. Finding the right send time is an optimization step. And if you're still, if like the most you can do with your available bandwidth is send emails a couple times a week, then that's absolutely what you should prioritize. That's just a little side note. But back to our test here, A/B tests can take a while to complete, so just be aware of that. It might take you a month until you find whether the morning or evening send time is the best one to use. So just use patience and work on other tests in the meantime, flows, sign up forms, all that stuff. That's why it's good to have several different tests going on. Obviously, don't test two different things in the same send. It's not going to work, because then you're just not going to know what drove the difference. So this is basically A/B test, right? This is one of my favorite ways of testing different things, because you can, it's simple. You probably know it already from testing calls to action, subject line, stuff like that. It's the same thing. You're just testing a different send time instead of content. If you're not using Klaviyo, you might not have this feature, but that applies to all other features as well. So I just wanted to mention that, because I work on some send accounts and they don't have that feature yet. I'm sure they'll bring it out soon, but some platforms don't have that. But if you do, it's a good one to use. And obviously only testing two options, which is a pro and a con, because it will get you data faster than testing 24 different options, but it limits you in the choice, and you have to make a choice basically. Okay, so enough about the A/B test. I think you get what it's about. Now let's talk about one last option, which is the gradual send, which is very interesting because it's a combination of the smart send time and the A/B test in a way. It is much more customizable in how much data you want to throw at this, and it allows at the same time for more options than an A/B test. So the way this works is, I'm going to switch back to this window here. Here you have a third option, right? You have gradual send over several hours. Send your message to a select percentage of your recipients over time. So what this means is you select an amount of hours that you're going to run the test for, and you select that by choosing how many percent of your list are going to get an email. So the shortest you can complete this test is in 2 hours. So that would be an A/B test, right? You're sending recipients over 1 hour, over a 2 hour period. And the slowest you can do is 10 hours, right? So then 10, because it does, this percentage of recipients per hour. So if you just choose 10%, it's going to run over 10 hours. So you can kind of pick within that time frame. Unfortunately, you can't. It's not super linear. So you can, if you want to, I think, you can only do 10 hours, 5 hours, 4 hours, 5. So you have a couple of choices here, right? 3 hours and then 2 hours. So I'd say you have enough options to run some interesting tests. This is more like if you're not sure in a time frame, right? So for example, thinking back on the main con of the smart send time, which is that you have a lot of waste, right? We have a lot of emails that go out in the middle of the night. We can fix that with a gradual send, where instead of sending over 24 hours, we send over 10 hours. And so what happens here is, we can select 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. And that's going to be our time frame. So between 10 a.m. and 8 p.m., it's going to send to people, and that is going to give us some data across that entire period. So now we're doing the same thing as the 24-hour smart send time, but we're doing it more manually. We'll still have to manually compile the data if we do it over several sends. We're losing that option. But most importantly, we're also reducing the waste, because we're not sending in the middle of the night. We're sending in a specific time frame that we set, right? So then I think the obvious disadvantage of that as well is, and if I forgot to put it here, but you have a limited range, right? If you want to test 8 a.m. versus 8 p.m., which is a good test to do, you can't do that with gradual send. But if your 2 times that you want to test if you have more times that you want to test, if you're kind of thinking, well, I think that my users are going to be more active in the afternoon on weekends, you can set up a test that will, you will always do a gradual send from noon to 5 or from 1 to 6 in the afternoon whenever you do a weekend send. And then you can manually compile that data to get this kind of overview, and you can even make a graph because now you have 5 different hourly timeframes that you can use. So that's a really good tool to have if you want to avoid the waste of Smart Send Time. It is more work than the Smart Send Time because you don't automate it, but it is a lot less waste in terms of kind of wasted recipients, just to find out that 4 a.m. is not your best send time. So these are the main options that you have. I think these are all the options that are out there. Again, those data-driven ones, you can't do local time zones because there's already so much going on with different time, with different time frames here, that it would just make everything more messy if we also added different time zones. I think that's kind of the reason why these data-driven ones don't have recipients' local time zones. So in those, you have to set a time zone that you want to pick. So that's also going to be a limitation, I'd say, of all those data-driven ones. I like using the data-driven ones a lot because it helps us get a better understanding how our audience reacts to sends overall. But it is also important to keep in mind that we give up on that. We're not treating everyone the same, in the sense that we're treating a California recipient who gets an email at 8 p.m. the same as a New York resident who gets an email at 5 p.m., which are, if you think about activity wise, what you're doing at 5 versus 8, those are two very different activities, different stages of the day. And that's the same whether you're in New York or California or Europe or wherever you are, right? So that is definitely a limitation. If you were really serious about this and wanted to find out, you could always segment your list by different time zones and then have 3 different campaigns. That's or 4 if you're in mainland US. If you're in, let's say if you want to do America versus Europe, you could do that as well. Depending on how many markets there are, you would have to split the list in segments and then do a gradual send for each of the sends. And that would be more accurate if you want to keep in mind the send times. I would only advise that for very large lists because that is going to take a while to complete those tests. It's already going to take a while without splitting the list. So if you do that, it's only for very advanced accounts. So yeah, if you don't have a massive list, I would say you're just going to have to live with that limitation, and most brands do, and you can still gain some insights from the list with data-driven insights like that. And then, once you have an insight, if you think, if the majority of your list is in a specific time zone, you get an insight about a time zone that is best to use. Let's say you find that, not a time zone, a time. If you find that 10 a.m. is the best end time on weekdays, you can just switch to the simpler local time frame, and then just local time zone, and then just send the new sends to people using local times. So you only need to use these options during testing phases, and once you're out of testing phases, you can switch back to local time and use the insights you've gained to improve your performance. So these options are all, they have pros and cons, right? Some of them I wouldn't use at all, like the fixed send time. So I'm just going to switch back one last time. The fixed send time here, I wouldn't use that. I would always use local time. I wouldn't use smart send time either, but that's me. I know some people like to use it. But yeah, I've given you all the information I have, so you can make up your mind. I usually use local time and then one of these 2 options to do more advanced testing, and then immediate sending for emergencies. I hope this makes sense and kind of clears up some of the confusion around all the smart send times, answers some questions, and maybe gives you some more ideas on how to test different send times in the future. I know this is something that took me a while to get around all the pros and cons of each of these send times, so hopefully that can smoothen or flatten the learning curve a little bit there. And I hope that it helped. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and thank you for watching.